Paul McCartney. The familiar image with a gentle smile, immortal melodies like Yesterday or Hey Jude. In the eyes of the public, he is the symbol of love and faith, a friendly Beatle who always brings light and hope. But behind that smile hides a much darker truth. McCartney once kept in his heart a blacklist, a list of people whom he hated, despised, and would never forgive. On that list, there are names that make the whole world shudder. A close friend who once co-wrote over 200 timeless songs with him, but then turned his back and publicly mocked him. Another musical genius, whom Paul considered like a younger brother, who ultimately betrayed him with a fatal stab involving the Beatles' legacy. A deranged murderer who coldly pulled the trigger, robbing Paul of his last chance for reconciliation, and even powerful figures in the financial and artistic worlds who turned the Beatles' pride into a wound that never heals. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine an artist who has stood at the pinnacle of glory his entire life, but lives with the pain of betrayal from those closest to him. Paul McCartney, revered as kind and compassionate, once exclaimed that he truly hates some people more than anyone else in the world. What caused such a sensitive soul to become so full of bitterness? Who left in his heart cuts so deep that time cannot erase them? And why, until the very end of his life, did he choose silence, hiding that blacklist, instead of exposing it to the whole world? Stay with us, to step into a story full of tragedy, conflict, and secrets that have never been fully told about Paul McCartney. A story where friendship, music, and fame blend into an endless tragedy. The first person on the list is Michael Jackson, a relationship once seen as brotherly, ultimately becoming an unforgivable betrayal. In the early 1980s, Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson frequently talked, collaborated, even considered each other like family. McCartney saw Michael as a younger brother, while Michael regarded Paul as a respected elder in the music world. But then, it was McCartney himself who unwittingly handed Michael the key to betrayal. During a friendly conversation, Paul revealed the secret to long-term success in music, investing in song copyrights. No one expected that Michael would remember that advice and use it against Paul himself. In 1985, ATV Music, the company holding most of the Beatles' song copyrights, was put up for sale. Michael Jackson, at the peak of his career, spent about $47.5 million to buy it all. Paul McCartney was stunned. He couldn't believe that the brother who once sat at the same dinner table, who once held hands on stage, had become the one to seize the greatest legacy of his life. From then on, the beautiful friendship between Paul and Michael shattered completely. McCartney later admitted multiple times that it was a knife in the back he would never forget. The second name is much more painful. John Lennon. If Michael was betrayal from the outside, then Lennon was a fatal wound from within the heart. Paul and John were once the soul of the Beatles. Together they wrote over 200 songs, becoming a legendary songwriting duo. But they were also the ones with the deepest conflicts. When Brian Epstein, the Beatles' financial manager, passed away, the band immediately fell into chaos. Paul wanted to keep the Beatles on a professional path, while Lennon wanted to break everything to find freedom with Yoko Ono. Conflicts erupted. Paul became domineering in the studio. Lennon publicly ridiculed him. The peak was in 1971 when Lennon released the song How Do You Sleep, mocking Paul that his only achievement was the song Yesterday. Paul was deeply hurt, and years later still mentioned this song with bitterness. Yet despite the arguments, despite the confrontations, Lennon was still the only brother Paul considered a soulmate. That's why John Lennon's death in 1980 buried any chance of reconciliation. And Paul understood that the hatred would never be resolved. But the one McCartney truly hated to the bone is Mark David Chapman, the murderer who took Lennon's life. On December 8, 1980, in front of the Dakota Building, Chapman fired the gun, ending Lennon's life and forever closing the door on reconciliation between the two soulmates. Upon hearing the tragic news, Paul only blurted out, "It's a drag," It's really tragic. Those brief words angered the public, who thought he was insensitive. But the truth is, Paul was too devastated to express his true emotions on camera. Later, McCartney confessed, Chapman not only killed Lennon, but also killed a part of the Beatles' soul. In Paul's eyes, Chapman forever remains a coward, a monster whom he will never forgive. But the blacklist doesn't stop there. Behind it, there's Yoko Ono, the woman who always made Paul feel suffocated in the studio, and who was the main cause of the rift in the Lennon-McCartney friendship. There's George Harrison, the youngest brother who once rebelled, leaving Paul with the pain of estrangement. There's Alan Klein, the cunning financial manager who turned the legal battles into the end of the Beatles. There's Phil Spector, the producer whom Paul claimed ruined the song The Long and Winding Road, and even Frank Sinatra, who once publicly mocked rock music, calling Yesterday a mournful song. Each name is a cut. Each story is a pain, and all together they form the blacklist that haunted Paul McCartney throughout his life. But why? Did he choose silence? Why did Paul McCartney never publicly name them, never let that blacklist be revealed to the public? Paul McCartney had many reasons to go public. He could have stepped into the light, recounted all the wounds, exposed each name that betrayed him, trampled on him. If he did that, perhaps the whole world would be in an uproar. Newspapers flooded with sensational headlines, fans arguing endlessly. But McCartney chose silence. First, Paul understood one thing. In the eyes of millions of fans, he is not just a musician. He is the friendly Beatle, the symbol of love, peace, and the belief that music can heal the world. If one day he stood up, criticized Michael Jackson, named Yoko Ono, or cursed John Lennon, that image would vanish. People would no longer remember him through Let It Be, but only as a bitter old man, living forever in the past. McCartney was too wise to let that happen. Second, he knew well the destructive power of the media. Just one careless word, and the press would blow it up into a storm. If he blurted out, I hate Yoko, or I don't forgive John, then the next day, every front page would turn it into a new war, an endless scandal, and the Beatles' legacy, the symbol of friendship and peace, would be dragged into the mud. Paul had already paid the price for clumsiness. When Lennon was assassinated, the brief phrase, "It's a drag," led to fierce criticism. He knew well, once words escape, they no longer belong to you. They get distorted, exploited, and ultimately become weapons turned back against you. Third, McCartney understood that the Beatles were no longer just four lads from Liverpool. They are a global cultural icon. If he publicly expressed hatred, not only would his personal image be damaged, but the Beatles' legend would collapse. And that, for him, was unacceptable. He would rather endure in silence, swallow the pain, than destroy the beautiful image that the whole world cherishes. And finally, there's a very human reason. Paul is old, in his 80s. He no longer wants to be seen as petty. He wants to leave for posterity an image of serenity, forgiveness, an artist who chooses forgiveness over hatred, because he knows well. History remembers not just the music, but the person behind the music. McCartney never forgets the pain, but he chooses to turn it into music. Instead of shouting, I hate you, he lets the melodies of Too Many People or Let It Be Naked speak. That's how he both protects his honor and keeps the Beatles immortal forever. It can be said, Paul McCartney's silence is not weakness. It is a form of victory, a silent victory, but enough to preserve the legacy. Keep the Beatles' monument intact in the memories of millions. And that silence, paradoxically, makes his blacklist more mysterious, more intriguing than any scandal. But the big question remains. Deep in his heart, whom does McCartney truly hate the most? Is it Michael Jackson, who took away the Beatles' copyrights? Or Yoko Ono, who interfered in the sacred friendship? Or Mark Chapman himself, who forever cut off the chance for healing? Throughout his life, Paul McCartney has faced many betrayals, many pains. Michael Jackson took the Beatles' copyrights. John Lennon publicly mocked him with a song, George Harrison rebelled, leaving the studio. Alan Klein deceived, causing the Beatles to disband. Phil Spector turned his music into chaos. Frank Sinatra ridiculed an entire generation of rock. But if he had to choose one name, the person McCartney truly hates the most, it's none other than Mark David Chapman. December 8, 1980, the cold New York sky. In front of the Dakota Building, John Lennon was shot by Chapman, a former fan, but with a disturbed and obsessive mind. 4 shots rang out. Lennon collapsed right in Yoko Ono's arms. Just minutes later, a part of the Beatles' soul vanished. Paul heard the news, stunned, dazed. In front of the cameras, he tried to hold back tears, only uttering the brief phrase, "It's a drag." But the truth is, his heart was shattered, not just for losing a friend, but because the chance for reconciliation was buried forever. McCartney once said, "Chapman didn't just kill John, he stole the last opportunity for us to sit together again." To him, Chapman isn't just a killer. He is the one who destroyed dreams, erased every hope that the Beatles could reunite one more time, even if just for a moment. What pains Paul the most is that just weeks before the death, he and Lennon had started contacting each other again. They talked on the phone, reminiscing about the old days. Between them, a door to reconciliation had just cracked open, but Chapman locked that door with blood. And from that moment, McCartney understood. This hatred could never be resolved. In his eyes, Chapman is a cowardly monster. He refused to name him for many years, only referring to him as a deranged person. Because for Paul, even placing Chapman's name next to Lennon is an insult. But ironically, Chapman is only part of the wound, because right after Lennon's death, the arguments around Yoko Ono exploded even more. For Paul, Yoko was the one who made Lennon distance himself from him, the shadow standing between their sacred friendship. McCartney doesn't hate Yoko for the love she gave John, but hates her for always trying to prove Lennon was the only genius, while Paul was just the one who writes easy listening music. He once bitterly admitted, without Yoko, the Beatles might have lasted a few more years. And for decades, they remained tense in disputes over copyrights, names, and legacy. Thus, the name McCartney hates the most can be divided into 2 layers. As a human being, Mark David Chapman, because he stole the only chance for reconciliation. As an artist, Yoko Ono, because she is the symbol of division and the most persistent wound in the artistic love between McCartney and Lennon. But the bigger question remains. Why did McCartney, despite hating Chapman, despite dissatisfaction with Yoko, despite disappointment with Michael Jackson, choose silence? Why did he never publicly reveal this list, but only let it live in the shadows? Paul McCartney could have revealed everything. He could have named each person on the Blacklist, poured out all his resentment so the world would side with him. But he didn't. And that silence, paradoxically, makes him greater. Paul understands a simple yet profound truth. Fame doesn't come with the public's forgiveness. People will easily praise an artist who knows how to smile, how to love, but will turn away if they see him become petty, bitter. Paul knows well, one wrong word can topple an entire monument, and he chooses to remain silent, so the Beatles forever exist as the symbol of friendship and peace. Paul chooses to let music speak instead of hatred. When Lennon publicly mocked him with the song "How Do You Sleep," McCartney didn't counter directly in the media. He responded with the melody of "Too Many People," subtle but sharp. When Phil Spector ruined the long and winding road, Paul didn't argue anymore, but waited until 2003, releasing Let It Be. Naked to affirm, "This music belongs to me. No one has the right to trample it." Music, for Paul, is not just a career. It is a weapon, a shield, and also the place where he resolves wounds that can never be put into words. That silence is also a strategy. McCartney is not just a musician. He is a global brand, a smoothly running economic machine, tours that bring in hundreds of millions of dollars, song copyrights worth a fortune. McCartney understands that a positive image sells more tickets than a bitter one. He chooses to smile, chooses light, because that's how he protects both his musical legacy and his commercial legacy. And finally, perhaps most importantly, Paul wants to leave for posterity a legacy of love, not hatred. At 80, he no longer needs to prove he's right. He doesn't need to recount who betrayed him, who hurt him. What he wants is for audiences to remember a Paul McCartney on stage, guitar in hand, gentle smile on his lips, singing melodies that make millions sing along. People often say, time heals all wounds. But for Paul McCartney, it's not just time, but choices that decide whether a wound becomes an ugly scar or a gentle memory. He chooses forgiveness, or at least chooses silence. And in that way, he leaves humanity a lesson. Sometimes, silence is the highest form of victory. Today, as the stage lights gradually dim, McCartney still smiles, still sings, still brings the faith that music can rise above hatred. And perhaps the true legacy he leaves is not just Yesterday or Hey Jude, but the image of an artist who went through betrayal, endured bitterness, but ultimately chose light and love as his final message to the world. That's why, even as other legends fade into the past, Paul McCartney is still there, still singing, still shining brightly in the hearts of millions. Because above all, he has proven a simple yet profound truth. Love is always stronger than hatred. Throughout his long journey, Paul McCartney has tasted every glory and bitterness. From the glorious stages of the Beatles to long empty nights due to the loss of friends, from betrayal by those he once considered brothers to the pain of losing a soulmate with no chance for reconciliation, and then facing it all, Paul chooses silence, chooses to let music speak instead of hatred, chooses a gentle smile to replace bitter tears. Today, as audiences around the world still sing along to Hey Jude or Hum Let It Be, the true legacy McCartney leaves is not just melodies, but a message that love, forgiveness, and faith are always stronger than wounds, stronger than the deepest hatred. Perhaps we, those who have gone through most of life, all carry in our hearts a blacklist of our own. But looking at McCartney, we understand that silence, forgiveness, or simply moving on sometimes is the greatest gift we can give ourselves. So, when mentioning Paul McCartney, remember that he is not just a music legend. He is living proof of the power of choice, the choice to turn hatred into memory, and memory into immortal melodies. That's why, after all, Paul McCartney is still singing, still smiling, and still loved by the world. The story of Paul McCartney is not just the private story of a music legend. It is also a mirror for us to reflect on our own lives, about friendship, betrayal, and how to face pain. If this story has touched your emotions, please leave a comment below. Share your thoughts and memories about the Beatles, about McCartney, or about the melodies that have accompanied the years. Don't forget to press the like button and subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you emotional stories, little-known secrets about the legends of the music and film world. Let's together keep those memories alive, so that music, love, and faith always echo in each of our hearts.